All right. So I've got a countdown on my side. I'm recording locally. And then I'm going to try to see if I can. I'm supposed to be able to push this. Let's see here.
Sure.
No, so that's just sharing our screen. I don't want to do that.
Yeah. I don't see it, babe.
Well, if not, then that's okay.
We're still learning this
Yeah, we're still learning
system.
this system.
Oh, I
So I
learn
thought,
something every day, whether it's my
yeah,
phone or
yeah.
the computer.
Oh, me too.
Actually, let me see.
I laugh about it because I feel like I'm an old lady on Instagram. I'm like, well, I don't know what I'm doing. I have no idea
Nope.
how to make any of these things.
Any
But
update, I'm like, oh my God, now I got to relearn this. And
Yeah,
thank
yeah,
God for him.
exactly.
I don't edit anything. I make these videos. I go there. I try to make some B-roll if he's not
yeah.
with me,
Yeah.
but he does all of it. And so that's what's funny about having two people work on a podcast is we'll argue about what needs to be included because he'll be like,
Yeah.
that's boring. No one cares about that. And I'm like, but you can't tell the story without telling that part of the story. I'm like, historians else cares. I'm like, but this is what historians. So that's
My
what's
wife does
funny
the
about
same
two
thing.
people on a podcast.
Yeah. She every now and then when I take her with me, she'll do some B-roll for me. She likes to
Yeah.
keep busy. And she's like, "Well, you should rephrase that." And I'm like, "Well, it's my okay, you're right. You should rephrase
Yeah.
that." And I'm like, "All right, all right."
All right. I think we are live.
It's been fun. I mean, he's taught me a lot. I used to like not look at the camera.
Yeah.
Um, I had to really like focus on looking at the camera while I was
Oh yeah.
talking and so we've it's been a big learning experience for us, but it's fun to do
Hmm.
together, I have to
Oh
say.
yeah.
So does your wife like history? Because Scott hates history.
She does. She's a history teacher, so I hope she
Oh,
loves
see,
history.
Oh, that's
yeah,
awesome.
you're lucky. I have
Yeah.
someone who's like, this is if his that's his litmus test. Is
Yeah.
like if he can stay interested in it.
In one of the videos that I'm so
Yeah.
I'm pretty sure that I'm live that we're live on YouTube. I guess we'll just kind of find out. I can't it says
Okay.
in my YouTube studio that we are.
Okay.
So that's what it says here. All right. So
Well,
we're
that's
so we're just going to give it a go. So I'm going to count down and I've got a little standard intro that I read um and then we'll jump right into it.
Cool.
Hold on. That's right. So we'll start in 3, 2. Welcome to Talk with History. I'm your host, Scott, here with my wife and historian, Jen.
hello.
On this podcast, we give you insights to our history inspired world travels, YouTube channel journey, and examine history through deeper conversations with the curious, the explorers, and the history lovers out there. Today, we are joined by James, the host of Project Past on YouTube channel. Welcome, James.
Hello. How you guys doing?
Good,
Good.
good, good. Now, before we get to chatting with James and I introduce him and let him tell us a little bit about himself, I'm going to ask our listeners and our for reviews on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you are listening. The reviews truly help the show grow. And come on, the sooner you give us a review, the sooner we can catch the History Channel because the History Channel can't stay on top forever. We're coming for you.
Well,
All
you have
right,
an
now.
advantage. You actually talk about history.
Yes, exactly. Bring history back to the History
That's
Channel.
right. That's right.
Yes.
So as I was saying, our guest tonight is the host of Project Past YouTube channel, and where he takes you on an exploration of our nation's battlefields, museums, and little-known historic sites. He does this all while protecting our neighborhoods as a firefighter when he's not visiting Civil War sites, and he is a fantastic follow on Instagram. Really, just go give him a follow. He's super fun over there. So how you doing tonight, James?
I'm fantastic. Happy to be
Yeah,
here.
yeah. Well, I'm super happy that we were finally able to kind of line up our schedules.
Yeah.
Sometimes that's tricky when the large majority, I'll call us history content creators, work full time doing other stuff.
Yeah.
So James, can you
Yeah.
tell us a little bit about yourself and how you came to be a fan of history, and maybe how that eventually developed into the YouTube channel?
Well, I'm James. I live in Florida, and my love for history started way back when I was a wee lad. Ever since I can remember, I've been addicted to military history, whether it was, playing with soldiers or tanks, planes, anything military related, I had it. As I got a little older, maybe second or third grade, my dad popped in Gettysburg, and from then on, I
Oh yeah.
was completely hooked. You know, we look at it today, it wasn't, completely historically accurate, but at the time it gave my imagination a place to go. Shortly after that, my dad was also big into Roman Empire. So Gladiator was a staple
cool.
in our house.
Mhm.
Oh, right on.
So, on the weekends, those movies were on, especially when there was no football on. And shortly after that, The Patriot came out, and I was always outside,
Oh, yes.
pretending I was a swamp fox battling the redcoats. The neighbors probably thought I was insane. I can't tell you how many times I defended Little Round Top in my neighborhood. I mean, I lost count. So yeah, and as I got older, got more into sports, I'm happy that it stuck with me. I get home from football practice and pop on the History Channel when it had history, like Mail Call, and one of my favorite shows was Civil War Combat.
Yeah.
It's actually, they just uploaded the videos on YouTube now, so it's actually kind of cool. I went back and watched a few, so hopefully they're moving back towards some history stuff.
Sure.
And then high school came, and then I took a video production class. So that's really all the experience I have as far as videography or editing or things like that. Took it kind of just, I needed another elective, and I actually really enjoyed it. Graduated high school, became a firefighter, went to EMT school, became a paramedic, and I've been doing that since 2010. Luckily for me, the fire service is pretty steeped in history and tradition, so that was pretty cool to learn that kind of stuff and kind of learn those traditions and pass those on to the newer people coming in. So that was a pretty easy transition for me. And then when COVID hit, my wife and I talked about doing something when everything opened back up, returned to normal, and I came across a tiny YouTube page called the History Underground. And I started watching some of his DC videos, and shared them with my wife. She's like, "Oh, it's really cool." We started making a plan for a trip, and I went down the rabbit hole watching all of his videos, and we started watching them together. And she was like, "You should do something like this." I was like, "No way I can talk on camera like this guy." And so here we are. I created a page and kind of used some of that videography I learned. I've learned a ton. I learned that I wasn't prepared. You think you just go to a site and flip on the record button and you start talking. But as soon as I see myself on the camera, I forget how to speak. So, and then the outline I have in my head goes out the window. So it's pretty challenging, but I enjoy it. I had nothing as far as editing wise. I was doing everything on my phone. So slowly but surely, I'm at a place now that I feel like I can actually put out content and be comfortable with it. I got here today.
Awesome.
Yeah, no, that's awesome. You mentioned History Underground, previous guest of the podcast, and
I had connected with JD early on too, because I had found him and I reached out to him because he was in Arlington his first time, the same time we were, our first time.
Oh, cool.
And I was like, "You're."
Yeah, I think our Arlington video posted like a couple days before his.
And then he was like, "Oh my gosh!" After I watched your Arlington video, I was like, "I didn't even do Arlington very well." And I'm like, "See." So then we've been talking ever since. I love JD. He is so great. I mean, our avenues of history are different. He's very much immersed into the World War II side of everything. Some Civil War, with Gettysburg. But I just love him. He's such a great guy. That's what I love about meeting people like you. It's like, as long as you're happy and you enjoy what you're doing, it really, it's not work. Like, we enjoy this.
No.
This is something we find fun. It's a hobby. It's something that is interesting to us.
So was when your wife when you started the channel, right, and she kind of prompted you to do it, is she, you were saying before we started recording that she's a history teacher. So is she like kind of that much more excited about the channel because now it's something more you guys get to do together?
Yeah, she definitely is a big fan of mine. Her interests are actually different as far as history. She's more World War I, Russian Revolution, Cold War. I'm more American Revolution, Civil War. I mean, I love it all, but I feel like I enjoy those time periods the most. So when we go to a Civil War battlefield, she's kind of learning the first time about a lot of this stuff, but there's plenty of times where we're watching a documentary and she's like, this, and this. I'm like, I feel like I should be taking notes. But it makes for, when I want to plan a history trip, it's definitely, I don't have to kind of convince her. She's always pretty on board to go.
Yeah.
I have to say, I don't have to convince you either.
She doesn't have to convince me as long as I get to do the production side
Yeah.
of the channel. Because like that to me, that's in a weird way, right?
Because I
it's like
picked
the
some very
perfect pairing.
obscure things to do. Like
Mhm.
I wanted to do Henrietta Lacks, right? I wanted to do Gila Lacks. I wanted to do her home in Clover, Virginia. And Scott's like, who?
Like, in the middle of nowhere.
3-hour drive with the kids, but he's on board. He's like,
Yeah.
if you say it's important, Jen, then it's
Right.
important. Let's
and
go.
for me, I just enjoy the production side of it. So I give tons
Yeah.
of props to folks like yourself and JD and other folks who are doing like both the research side and the talking on camera side and the video and editing side, because I've done that a little bit before. I tried like my own little like personal vlog family channel
Mhm.
a while, and that's how I kind of cut my teeth in editing. I had been doing it for a good 2 or 3 years before we ever started the channel.
Yeah.
So I had learned a lot just purely by doing, right? As you can probably attest to.
Yeah.
Oh yeah,
So-
it's a lot goes into it. Like I said, you think that you're like, oh, I can go to a site and talk about it, and it's so much more. You got to do the research, and then you got to
It's
go
It's a
to
lot
the
of
site,
practice.
and then you
Yeah.
got to film, be comfortable
Yeah,
talking
and
in front
then-
of
yeah.
people.
Yeah.
Make sure that I get that footage. Did I connect the story? Did I
Yeah.
say the right thing? Did I hook the right thing? Like,
Yeah.
all
Yeah,
and that's why it's so hard. Like, I feel like that's just enough. And then for him to do all the editing, I don't even.
Yeah.
I'm so thankful to have
And
him.
I I don't I heavily edit, our videos. I
Heavily
put
edit.
yeah. Not
Don't worry, I do
not
too.
necessarily because of her, but because I'm trying to find the story. Jen gets so wrapped up in the facts and just excited in her, and that's what I like about when I get to talk to a guest like yourself. I kind of go check out your videos. I check out another guest videos, and you can see the passion, right? And that usually comes through on camera. Usually, like if, for her, she's giggling like a schoolgirl if she's somewhere that she really wants to be, and that comes through. And I
Yeah.
intentionally leave that on camera, and people will comment on that. They'll be like, "Oh, I can see you're so passionate about history." But she gets so wrapped up in that, and she kind of loses the story. And so I'm trying to tell the story from an editing perspective and all that stuff. So it's a
Yeah, it's a fine balance because you get wrapped up in going to a site. You're like, all right, I got to film. I have a small window to film, and then
Sorry, James.
no, you're good.
Did your audio cut out?
I can't hear anything. Can you hear
Okay.
me?
Yeah, I can hear you just fine.
Okay, well, keep going.
Yeah, you're good. Okay. Well, we'll keep chit chat.
Hey, no worries.
I just can't hear James at all. So I'll get the other headphones.
You're not missing much.
He's on. Okay.
Ask him.
But so yes, so as far as the production side and doing all that stuff, like even Jen still sometimes now, we've been doing this for creeping up on 2 years. I think we started like literally like a couple months before you did. And every now and then she'll like turn the camera on, she'll be like, "Ah, I forgot what I was gonna say," and she's got to look at
Oh
her
my God,
notes
yeah.
and all that stuff. So what's some places you kind of still want to get to as
Oh.
far as like kind of what are a couple things that are still on your list of like here there.
Well, that list gets longer every day.
Yeah.
So I just got back from Gettysburg. I spent 2 days there, which obviously wasn't enough. Definitely, I need to go back there. I barely even scratched the surface of what was there. I'd like to hit Antietam again. Harper's Ferry. If I can choose a
do that
place that I
too.
haven't been to, I drove through it on the way back from Antietam back to the airport, and I was like, all right, this is moving closer to the top of the list for me.
Yeah.
Harper's Ferry is probably my number one. I would like to get back to Chattanooga. I visited before. I had the channel. Lookout Mountain was an amazing view.
Yeah.
Probably one of the most unique battlefields that you can probably visit. I mean, just the geography itself was, I don't even know how you would assault that mountain to begin with.
Yeah. Yeah.
But I would like to get out west, maybe a little Bighorn. I feel like I've covered a lot of East Coast, which makes sense because I'm, on the East Coast. But
Sure.
and I do want to get to Normandy, just to,
that'd
Just
be
to
cool.
see it.
Yeah.
When you talk about World War II, we go to museums and stuff, but they go to a battlefield. Like, we can go to a Civil War battlefield and you're like, okay, this is what we learned in school, and this is what all the documentaries we read about and watch. But World War II, I feel like you can't just go out in your car and see a battlefield. Especially when you're in the lower 48.
Yeah.
That's definitely a place I want to go to for sure.
Yeah, no, that's super cool. All right, so
Yeah.
that's thank you for kind of telling us about your channel, kind of how
Yeah.
you learned about history. Now the next step that I like to I do with our guests is it's like what I call a word association game. Okay,
All right.
so it's just like it sounds. Like we all know, it's I say a word, you let me know first thing that pops
First
in your
thing.
head. Just let
Okay.
us know, and it's all eventually steering towards a subject, and this is just kind of a fun way to broach that subject. So,
Okay.
if I was to say the word or phrase, if I was to say catchy tune, what would you think?
Catchy tune. I would say Enter Sandman by Metallica.
Ooh, yeah, good one. Oh my gosh,
Our
that's-
generation.
Yeah, that's what I'm talking
Yeah.
about. All right, if I was to say England, what would you think?
God Save the Queen.
Yes, absolutely,
Especially this week.
absolutely.
Right?
All right, if I
Mhm.
was to say Arthur, what would you think?
King.
Okay, King Arthur. Now, if I was to say six wives, what would you think?
Very popular.
Very popular.
So we thought for sure you'd get it on that
so
one.
those words were all leading into Henry VIII.
Okay.
So
Oh,
Henry
okay.
VIII, right? So catchy tune. There's that catchy tune like I'm Henry VIII. I am. I am. Funny aside, that song actually became very popular in the '60s and dethroned "Satisfaction" by the Rolling Stones.
It was the Hermits.
Yeah.
Uh-huh.
Of course you know that. I had to look. I had to like look
love
that
music
up.
history, too.
I had to look that up. But so funny
Yeah.
aside on that. So tune was like the Henry VIII catchy tune.
So
England,
Metallica wasn't close.
but that's
It's
okay.
a catchy tune.
That's okay, right? That's
good riffs.
that's the fun part of this is people get to play along too.
Yeah.
And then Arthur. Now Arthur was actually Henry VIII's older brother. So
Okay.
Jen was telling me this.
Yeah, so Henry VII's first son was Arthur, and Arthur is the one who inherited the throne, but he dies young,
Right.
and so Henry VIII inherits it
Yeah.
after him and
So-
actually marries his wife, Catherine. That was Arthur's wife.
Yeah. And then six wives. Henry VIII had six wives. And then so what that just kind of a fun way to kind of ask people, because we like to ask this question is what do you remember either in your youth learning about Henry VIII, if anything at all? Like for me, it's typically not much.
Yeah.
Or what kind of stands out to you about Henry VIII now?
Kind of a popular historic figure.
Yeah.
We try to figure out like how people about them. And
Yeah, what do you remember learning about Henry VIII, if anything?
Honestly, nothing. I can't recall a time where we even broached that subject.
Yeah.
Yeah. So when you made the association, I was like, "Ooh, definitely over my head."
Yeah.
so
yeah.
you never watched like the Tudors or
Mm-mm.
the other Boleyn girl? I mean, that was
No.
Scarlett Johansson. Everyone wanted to watch that movie.
Yeah, I would say for me the only thing I was vaguely aware of like Henry VIII and like the whole wives thing, and that he had like basically had two or three of a bunch of his wives,
Yes.
right?
Okay.
So
That
he-
see
that's-
now
that's
that kind of
right.
rings a bell.
Yeah.
see when you say and that's how I am.
Yeah.
Right? When it comes to
Yeah.
history stuff, like if you said something that you kind of thought I should have learned in history class, I'd have been like, yeah, that sounds familiar, right? I'm very good at that kind of that.
So
kind
he's
of stuff.
Elizabeth the first father. The first
Okay.
Elizabeth, the first Queen Elizabeth,
Yeah.
who ushers in the Shakespearean era and everything, never
Yeah.
marries the Virgin Queen, who Virginia is named after. You know, like that's her father.
Okay.
So that's kind of like where he kind of gets most of his fame comes from her reign as
Yeah.
well.
I mean, and now that you mention it, James, like I'm trying to think of what history I remember learning about when I was younger, and I can't really say much more than like the whole era of when the U.S. Revolution and all that stuff.
Yeah,
Henry VIII is usually
very
something
little.
you learn about. Yeah, he's a good example of monarchy,
Yeah,
right?
Mhm.
They were so different than the English.
yeah. I mean,
Kind of-
is there any like kind of bits of U.S./English history crossing paths that that kind of stand out to you from learning? I mean, really for me, it's like Boston Tea Party, right? It's
Yeah, you have the early colonization of the East
Yeah.
Coast. You obviously touch on that leading up to the American Revolution. I'm trying to remember. We briefly touched on the 7 Years' War or French and Indian War, and then obviously the
That's
American
true.
Revolution
Yeah.
is something that's covered.
Yeah.
But outside of that, there's really not a whole lot. It's usually most history starts, early colonization to modern day now, from an American standpoint, at least.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I was actually trying to look up, and I went down kind of this path of Henry VIII because I was trying to pick a relatively famous English historical figure, because like you said, God save the Queen. Yeah, as of recording, the Queen passed a couple days ago.
Yes. Now
Yeah.
the anthem has changed to God Save the King.
That's right.
It's
That's
changed
right.
now.
And
That
so I
is
wanted
right.
to kind of it's
It
God
officially
Save the King.
changed
That's
the next
interesting.
day.
Did it?
Yeah.
I didn't know that. So
That's something you don't even think of.
yeah,
The national anthem can change like that.
yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
How interesting. So she is actually distantly related to Henry VIII. So Henry
Really?
VIII's sister is essentially her. I don't know how many ever times great grandmother.
Okay.
So the royal family of today is very distantly related to that Tudor era. So I was curious. I was like, Henry VIII. That kind of popped into my head when I was trying to think of something. And I was like, yeah, is he related to Queen Elizabeth II?
Yeah, and
So-
that's early Americas. Like in the
Yeah.
1500s, that's like the Americas were more like, we're going to send you to the Americas. Like it was your right. It's still a British colony, but it's kind of
Maybe
like
this colony
punishment.
survives.
Yeah, it's a
Yeah.
punishment more than anything else to be sent to the
Yeah.
Americas in the 1500s. Like
Yeah.
that.
Yeah. So I just thought that was kind of an interesting little bit because, right?
Yeah, I
us
actually
as-
enjoyed that.
Yeah, and as history fans, right?
Yeah.
He's one of those larger than life
Oh, I
kind of
love Henry
historical
VIII.
figures.
So one of the biggest Broadway plays right now is called Six, and it's the Six
Okay.
Wives of Henry VIII, and it's kind of like the Spice Girls. They all have their own personalities, and
Yeah.
I saw it on Broadway. It's amazing, and so I got into American history mostly because for my master's degree, if you don't speak a foreign language, you have to kind of do American history.
Yeah.
Like if you don't speak French or German, you can't really do world history.
Yeah.
So I was kind of like, okay, I guess I'll do American history, but I do love English history, and I drug into Hampton Court, which Henry VIII's castle.
They had character
He
actors
doesn't even
there.
remember. He remembers the jousting that was there. That's what he
I
remembers.
remember seeing the jousting. Yeah,
The jousting
they were,
is
like,
pretty
going at it,
cool.
too. Yeah, jousting's pretty cool. So it's just kind of a fun topic for me to bring up. But one of the next things I like to ask our guests is what's the first big historical event that you remember in your youth, whether it's local, a family thing. We've had a whole breadth of different things, whether it's national, global, but that first kind of big historical event that really kind of opened your eyes of like, oh my gosh, I remember when this happened.
Yeah, when you realize it's a bigger world out there.
Yeah. Well, I have a couple. Obviously, we're on the eve of 9/11. I was in 6th grade when that happened in my classroom, and it's hard to believe. On one hand, 21 years ago, it seems like it was a long time ago, and then on the other hand, it seems like it was just a couple weeks ago. It's always weird how you can remember every single detail of that day.
Yeah.
And even in 6th grade, like I remember where I was, what I had for lunch, my mom coming to pick me up from school because everyone was panicking, and
Sure.
I was at an age where I knew something bad was happening, but I didn't understand the magnitude, if that makes sense.
Were you in
just
Florida?
Yep.
Yeah.
I was in school. I think I was 6th grade. I think I was in geography class, and we were doing current events, and obviously the events unfolded. So definitely wanted to touch on that, especially being on the eve of the anniversary.
Yeah,
absolutely.
It's funny, James. I was in Florida.
Oh, that's right. You were.
Yeah.
Although Jen had just
I just finished flight school, naval aviation flight school.
Really? Were you
I
in
got my
Pensacola?
wings. I was at Pensacola. I got winged 3 days later.
Oh, wow.
First winging class after 9/11, and
Oh,
so
wow.
you and I were both in Florida. Very different experiences, but
yeah,
in the same
very
state.
different. But as you get older, especially we lived through that. It seems like it's more important, playing into that history standpoint, to keep that day relevant. As time goes on, those things naturally fade away. We have generations of adults now that weren't alive during that event.
Yeah.
And as I get older, you kind of view it a little differently. You know, you think about on the eve, September 10th, how many people went to bed for the last time? How many firefighters, cops went to work for the last time, you know?
Very true.
That's obviously a major world event. A more local event, I guess it was in 1998. We had really bad fires in Florida that year. I mean, they were all over Central Florida. We had a drought. It was during the summer, and it was kind of like a movie. You know, I was at the beach. I think I was 8 years old, so third grade, fourth grade, somewhere in there. And all of a sudden, you know, you see this huge plume of smoke in the distance. It was like a movie. You know, everyone kind of like turns and stops, and everyone's like pointing. You know, it's like kind of like Independence Day. You know, the ship comes through the skyline. And you know, we were always like, oh, it's a pretty bad fire. Well, a couple days later, you know, there were 2 giant fires in our county, and like I said, they were all over Central Florida, and they were worried that they were going to come together. And I was with my dad. We were at a hardware store, and you can look off to the west, and you can just see the glow, and giant pieces of ash are falling down in the parking lot. And then I remember this guy running out saying, "We got to go." And I guess they evacuated. They mandated that the whole county evacuate, which is the first time that's ever happened in Florida, and I think it hasn't happened since. It was a county that was growing, but they didn't have the resources at the time, fire department wise. So they were pretty much writing off the county, saying, "You guys got to go. We can't stop this thing." So you know, I was too young to understand what was going on. I just know that I was living through it. Luckily, the weather pattern shifted, and it was able to, I guess, stop it at a certain point where we were able to come back in about a week. But yeah, that was quite the experience, especially being 8 years old.
Now, did that really influence you in becoming a firefighter?
I thought the same thing.
I don't know. Like I said, I think I was a little too young to kind of. It definitely was in my mind, but I think 9/11 really kind of geared me to that career path. But I don't think, you know, that event hurt really. It probably helped me make my decision.
Yeah, that's so interesting. So when you like, I mean, I assume that you guys you came in the house and tailed it out of town.
Yeah, how
pretty much.
I mean, family or friends? Did you leave the state?
So my majority of my family lives in the same county, so we were all just rendezvoused in Jacksonville. And I mean, I remember the roads were jam packed, you know, because the highway was shut down because of the fire. So everyone was having to take, you know, these tiny back roads, and I think it took us like 8 hours to get to Jacksonville, and Jacksonville's about an hour drive under normal conditions. Yeah, and I just remember the glow, and you see these giant pieces of ash falling down. Yeah, that was definitely, you know, little things like that pop out to me then. I didn't understand it all, but yeah, it was interesting.
Yeah, that's super interesting. So that's you're probably the second person that's had kind of a more youthful, kind of closer family type one. Yeah, a friend of ours, Dave, had talked about like a car crash. Right, that he and his and for him, you know, I think it was something similar, right? It was something like big enough because I think his father, you know, had to be taken in an ambulance. It was okay, but it's the first time he saw his parents, his family
volatile,
you know, in a vulnerable, you know, situation. Same thing for you, right? It's that safety, and that kind of tends to be. That's a trend that I've seen from other things, right? We talked to Chris Witt from Witt Docs, and for him, it was when, like, I think the Gulf War started,
and people were scared,
and they were talking about it in church, and people were scared. And for him, it's the first time that he felt, for him, church was a safe space, but then people were using these words that felt dangerous. You know?
So people that you rely on for your safety, are in fear, and I guess it's the first time it allows you recognize
it's
that.
Just kind of a little bit of that shock to the system. Like, I don't quite understand this, but I know it's bigger than you know.
But you guys were okay? Was your house okay and everything?
Yeah, we were fortunate. We were in an area where that I don't know how, you know, how it played out, but the wind shifted just right, and our neighborhood kind of skirted our neighborhood. Other neighborhoods didn't fare so well. I think like 200 and something houses ended up being lost, but we were very fortunate to come back, and everything was pretty much right where we left it.
Wow, that's great.
Yeah. As a California kid, I am very familiar with fires and fire
It
season.
seems every year they're going through it.
And it's been getting worse. I'd say the
Yeah.
probably past 10 to 15 years, right? In my youth, and mind you, I lived a relatively sheltered youth, so I didn't really know what was going on outside of my house, let alone the larger state. But the fire seasons have been getting worse kind of over the past 2 decades or so. But for me, that was the 80s and 90s. Growing up in the California, not as bad fires up there, but I'm very familiar with the fire season and all that stuff, air quality and all that jazz. So yeah, very, very interesting. I think the youngest thing that I remember, so I was actually in Yellowstone when I was very, very young for like a big family vacation trip. And I must have been late 80s, maybe like
when the fires were happening
88,
there.
89, sometime around that time frame. So I would have been 7-ish. But they had a big fire in the park.
Because I lived in Wyoming when that happened.
And yeah,
I grew up in Wyoming mostly.
She grew up in Wyoming. But I was in Yellowstone, and the only thing I remember, and then when you said this, it kind of made me remember it, was that smoke in the distance. That's the only kind of visual image that I have that I can remember, because I was so young. And it wasn't really at home, and it was easy enough for us to leave because it was a vacation anyways.
But like you said, it's such a visual. For sure. It's more than just something on TV. It's something you're actually seeing playing out in front
and
of you.
especially as a kid, like they see things and they hold on to those things. They can, especially with their imagination. So seeing a fire and then actually seeing the huge column, like it was, you can definitely apply it, I guess, to kind of understand what's going on.
Oh, James, I give you so much credit as a firefighter. I'm going to say Scott and I are both Navy. We were both naval. We were naval officers. But when you're on a Navy ship, and you probably know this, James, everyone's a firefighter, right? Because you can't call the fire department, right? So everyone has to be trained in how to fight a fire. And everyone has to wear the gear with the mask, with the oxygen, and fight I sucked that oxygen. They kept saying, you need to calm down. I'm like, I cannot, this thing on my face. I'm like, this is not my jam. This is not
I was actually second ship. I was actually the damage control assistant. So they send us through an abbreviated version of probably what you guys do through DCA school. So we learn how to do things like, working with flooding, right? Because it's not just fires you're going to fight on a ship; it's potential flooding, right? And firefighting. So I was the guy in charge of like teaching the new sailors coming to the ship, firefighting and running those drills and getting my other experts and all that stuff. And I mean, they'd be throwing those things on, and so for us, on a Navy ship, when it comes to fire, when you're out and you're steaming independently, I mean, you were quite literally by yourself in the middle of the ocean. So you want to talk about like paramount importance. Like if you ever hear, on a Navy ship, what you're going to hear is you're going to hear a rapid ringing of the bells, and then you're going to hear there's a couple standard responses. It's either white smoke or black smoke or flooding, right? Those are pretty much the three. Black smoke. And so that you'll hear the rapid ringing of the bells all throughout the ship. And then, every single DC man and myself, because I was in charge and I was the guy who would actually direct the firefighting efforts on the ship. And so these are all DCAs that are on ships everywhere. And so they do the rapid ringing of the bells, black smoke in space, and they call the space. And I'm flying out of bed. I'm pulling my boots on, putting my red hat on,
and everyone has a place to go.
Sprinting down to Damage Control Central, and then I start calling it away, right? And all my teams are getting to their repair lockers and doing all the same thing. And it doesn't matter if it's a false alarm or not. I mean, you know this, false alarm or not, we're treating it like it's the real thing.
Shipboard firefighting is a whole different animal. That's you're fighting fire in a confined space that does nothing but conduct heat, which makes it hotter. That's a different animal than what we go through most of the time. So
I mean, it's
got a lot of respect your way too.
I never actually, I don't think we ever actually had to fight any fires while I was DCA. Maybe we might have had like one or two, like I think we had like one minor gas leak, right? And it actually ended up being pretty innocuous for the most part, but it was legitimate. I don't remember what was leaking. We were able to vent the space and it was fine. But Yeah, on a ship, I mean, it doesn't matter, right? And fire's hot. I don't
Yeah.
care where you are.
Yeah.
It
And you have to
doesn't
wear
really
a
matter.
ton of gear
Yeah.
to keep yourself safe, right? So not
Yeah.
only are you like wearing a ton of stuff on you, like even when we would practice fire drills with the helicopter, right? And the guys would have
Oh,
to come
really?
out to me and then carry me out of the helicopter with all their gear on.
So that, I mean, you mentioned kind of firefighting steeped in history. Like, what's some firefighting history that you could kind of like tell the average listener, like, like myself, like I couldn't speak to too much firefighting history. Like, is there stuff like in your kind of neck of the woods, or is it kind
Yeah. So, well, I'm in St. Augustine, so we got tons of history.
Oh, we got to go there. St. Augustine,
Yeah.
oldest
I'm here
city,
waiting.
right?
Yeah. So from a fire service standpoint, the Dalmatian, right?
Mm-hmm.
yeah.
So those were originally brought on with the fire department to help keep the horses calm while they're in the stables and stuff.
Okay.
So a lot of places have Dalmatians or some sort of dog to
That's
keep the
definitely
horses calm when they
firefighting dog.
weren't. Yeah. So that's kind of how that evolved into like a tradition or
That's
station
cool.
dog kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Huh.
Yeah. And then,
Neat.
the fire helmets are usually designed so the water flows back off your back so it doesn't go down your coat, things like that.
Yeah.
Little things like that,
Yeah.
like leather, so it expands. It doesn't really get damaged from heat. It's very pliable, durable. So a lot of leather helmets. So just trumpets. They used to use trumpets to communicate before radios.
Okay.
Yeah.
Cool.
Water mains instead of they used to be wood. So
Huh.
they would have to drill down to we call it catch a hydrant or catch a
Yeah.
plug. Well, that
Yeah.
term comes from water mains used to be wood. And in order to get the water supply, they would have to drill into the wood to get the water to the steam engines. And
Oh,
then they would
okay.
plug up the water main. So catch the plug kind of
After.
thing came from that.
Oh,
That's cool.
that's cool.
Little things
That's
like that.
cool. Well,
Yeah.
Yeah, and that's actually a perfect segue into kind of what tends to be my third question is what's some regional history in your area
Ooh,
that
got a lot.
that
Got a lot.
people may not
Yeah,
know,
we come
right?
to visit you, and we're gonna do a video.
Right.
Like,
Mhm.
you're gonna be like, let's do a video of this.
Hey, either regional history that everybody around there knows, right? We talked to
Mhm.
someone who lived in Missouri, and
Yep.
he was there for the Lincoln Douglas debate.
Mm-hmm.
Right, and everybody
Okay.
knows Lincoln Douglas debate happened in his neighborhood, right, in his little
Okay.
city.
Yeah.
Right, and I wouldn't have known that. I wouldn't be able to tell you
What
what
did
it
JD
was.
say? JD said something about the Missouri runners, like the people back and forth across the border.
Yeah, I can't remember. We'll have to listen back to that,
Missouri has a lot of
particular
great
episode.
history.
So if you're listening and you're
It
curious,
does.
go back into our podcast episode
Yeah.
and look for the one with History Underground. So what's some regional history that people might not know about where you are?
All right. So there's a ton. Before I start, I do have to acknowledge that Pensacola was established before St. Augustine. However,
Okay.
it was abandoned. So
Mhm.
St. Augustine has the title, nation's oldest city, continuously
Ah, okay.
occupied oldest city.
Cool.
So I always gotta put that out there because people
Yep.
will try and call me out or whatever. But, so it started in September 8th, 1565. The Spanish landed in what is now St. Augustine and established a base. Well, their goal was to attack the French, who had already established a base at a place called Fort Caroline, which is by modern-day Jacksonville. They
Okay.
established that in 1564, so almost a full year before the Spanish established St. Augustine. The Spanish, however, had already laid claims to Florida. They discovered it, and according to them, Florida was from the Keys all the way up to Maine. That was all theirs.
Yep.
That's how things
Wow.
worked back then.
Yeah.
So they weren't fans of the French setting up an outpost near Jacksonville. Some people think it was a little farther north into Georgia, but that general area.
Mhm.
And they were actually, the French, religious refugees. I guess they were exiled. They were French Huguenots. I guess there was some civil unrest at that time. So they established essentially one of the first religious refugee camps, I guess, or colonies in the Americas. Well, Spanish landed at St. Augustine. They were going to attack Fort Caroline simultaneously. The French were going to attack the Spanish at St. Augustine. The French went by sea. The Spanish went by land. The Spanish attacked a pretty much undefended Fort Caroline, killed everyone. If you stayed there, you were dead. They were brutal
Holy
back
cow.
then. Well, the French, on their way to St. Augustine, they hit a storm, shipwrecked most of the fleet. Most of the survivors would be washed up. About half of the remaining fleet would be washed up on the shores. So the Spanish made it back to St. Augustine, and local Timucuan Indians alerted them that, hey, there's some shipwrecked French over here that you better investigate. So Pedro Menendez and a small group of Spanish soldiers met the French at an inlet. And the French outnumbered the Spanish, but they were in no condition to fight. They were just shipwrecked. They've gone weeks without food, water, all that good stuff. So they're like, hey, you don't need to fight. Just surrender. We'll ferry you back to St. Augustine, but we can only take you 10 at a time because we only have a small supply of soldiers. The French were like, that's fine. I'm just thirsty and tired. So they would ferry them across this inlet, and when they got to the other side of the inlet, they would massacre them. They would murder them in groups of 10. Groups of 10. The other side had no idea. A couple weeks later, another group of French came. The same thing happened. Well, that inlet is now called Matanzas Inlet. And that word Matanzas means massacres or slaughters. So, and Matanzas right today is an absolutely beautiful inlet. It's a lot of boat traffic, beautiful beaches. And a lot of people probably don't realize how blood-soaked the sand dunes are that they're sunbathing on. So that's always something that's pretty interesting to me.
That's
That's a great piece of regional history. That's super, super neat. And talk about,
sneaky Spanish.
Well,
and then from then on, essentially the Spanish had control of Florida because there was no French left.
Long time.
And the French were like, all right, we get the point.
And in this country too, it's hard to point that far back. Right? Because for most people can be like 1700s, the 1600s, here and there, but to be able to point back to like, hey, longest kind of continuously occupied, or used city, in the entire continental United States, all the way back to the, what do you say, mid 1500s, late 1500s?
1565 is when St. Augustine they established it.
Yeah, that's a super cool.
We'll have to do that story. Have you done that story?
I have. It was one of my first episodes that I did on my phone, but I feel like I should go back and kind of use actually my camera and some better editing than from early on. But there's actually a fort there too now.
Really?
Oh, is there? Okay.
Yeah, Fort Matanzas. It was built in the 1740s by the Spanish because we're going into more history here. The Matanzas Inlet is kind of a back door to St. Augustine. So you have the St. Augustine Inlet, the Matanzas Inlet, and then there's a barrier island, and then St. Augustine. So when the British laid siege to St. Augustine, they came up the back way that was unguarded and burned down St. Augustine. Well, the Spanish learned from this, so they built an outpost there called Fort Matanzas in the 1740s. So you have the story about the beach, and then 200 years later, roughly, is now there's Fort Matanzas there, which is another cool little fort. It's on a barrier island. You got to take a little ferry there. It's awesome.
That's cool. Yeah, my kids are interested in those.
Yeah, they like doing we drag them everywhere, and at least they enjoy like the forts and the stuff that they can kind of.
Oh, I love forts. Yeah.
So that it gets kind of segue to the last question I like to ask folks, that do YouTube specifically is what's one video of yours that you've either really enjoyed the most, kind of your favorite, or something that kind of surprised you and stood out to you over the course of doing the YouTube channel?
Well, I learn every episode, no matter how much research you do. When you go to a site, it's completely different. You get a whole new perspective of whether it's a battlefield or a museum or a fort. You can read about it, but going there and seeing it and reading the stories from that site is definitely, you can't beat that. I learn something constantly. I guess because it's fresh in my mind and I just did it. I guess Antietam right now is probably one of my favorite places I visited. I do got Gettysburg stuff on the way, but I went to the Bloody Lane, which was just an ordinary sunken road before 1862, and now it's called the Bloody Lane. And something that was interesting was it was a sunken road because of wagon traffic. So a lot of the roads back then were heavily wagons, and that's how you got from one place to another. Well, I guess over time, the road sunk. And when a battle would come through, and those are great defensive positions, apparently. But seeing the sunken lane, you would think that, when you think of a battlefield, you think of flat, open land, that's why the casualties were so high. But the sunken lane it was interesting because you can walk up to it and you're in a depression. You can't even see the sunken lane. So you try to envision, a wall of Union troops coming to the sunken lane, and then all of a sudden, they reappear right in front of the Confederate infantry. So you can just get a sense of the terrain and how it affects and aids the defenders and inhibits the defenders. It's just things like that you can't beat.
Yeah, that's how
really cool.
I felt that way at Gettysburg. And I still feel that way every time I go to Gettysburg. I try to imagine all these men and just what it would have looked like to just see that. I think I got out there early in the morning when no one was on the battlefield yet. And I was up at Little Round Top before they had. I'm just like, gosh, I can't even imagine. It's so beautiful. And just to see all these people coming at you. You know, I'd be like, okay, here we go. We're gonna do the best we can.
I walk Pickett's charge. A lot of people do that, but again, that's another thing. When you watch the movie Gettysburg, it's just an open field, nice and flat, and you're like, oh, that's why they had no chance. But when I'm walking it, there was depressions where there was times where the Union couldn't see the Confederate forces, and that's things that you don't realize until you're walking the very ground that they walked. I don't know. It's always weird to go to a battlefield. The best way I can describe it is hauntingly beautiful. You got the mountains in the background and the stone fences, and you're like, how is this place home to such carnage?
Yeah, I felt that way about Yorktown. It wasn't the kind of went out and visited.
You were amazed by the earthworks.
We went back to get some quick footage or take some pictures later in the evening, and it was sunset at Yorktown, and it was
we went to the readouts.
It was the most serene,
and no one was there,
and there was nobody there.
We were just trying to take some pictures. My friend sent Flat Stanley, the little guy that you can send for school to take pictures in certain places for kids.
It's a kid thing.
And I said, I'll go to Yorktown. We were coming back from Williamsburg. So for us, it's on the way.
Yeah.
And we got there right at sunset. So, and the park closes at dusk, right? So we're trying to get in. And I went right to where Alexander Hamilton was at Redoubt 19.
Yeah, she went. And the thing about Yorktown, for those listening who haven't been to Yorktown, I think it's a little more open and kind of, I'd say it's a little more untouched than a lot of battlefields out there. And maybe this is my lack of experience of being to a bunch of battlefields, but there's such an expansive area for that Yorktown battlefield, right? There's multiple spots. And so even as we were driving out, right, and I'm driving in my car, here it is in 2022, I was just kind of in awe of just how beautiful it was and how untouched it was. I was like, this is what it looked like. Back when they were doing this battle. It was just
when you're alone.
It was cool.
It's weird.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Like it's like I'm here with where these people died, where these people fought. And, and it's much like Gettysburg Revolutionary War is so much hand-to-hand combat. Right? So it really is like you're feeling these emotions of these men who are fighting. Like it's different than when you get into World War II and stuff. You can be a little bit more removed from each other. It's not quite as physical, but it's like, wow, it's still crazy.
It's always hard to film when I was at the angle. I sat there for like 20 minutes, just like looking at the land and trying to remember what I've seen in the movie Gettysburg as opposed to what I was actually seeing. And it's definitely a humbling experience, and like the best way I can describe it is hauntingly beautiful.
Yeah. I'm always thankful I have my camera, because I'm like, if there's a ghost or something, I'm like, I don't believe in any of that, but I have the camera. So
yeah.
Well, James, I'm sure I feel like we could probably keep chatting for another hour if we wanted to, but that would be an extra long podcast for us. So we'll wrap up here, and then we can keep chatting, after I kind of hit stop record.
Cool.
So for those listening, what's the best place for people to find you?
Oh gosh, I am the worst self-promoter ever. My wife tells me that all the time. Well, I'm on Instagram. I think the actual name is project.past. I'm on TikTok now. I bit the bullet and jumped on TikTok. That's TikTok, Project Past underscore between project in the past. And on YouTube, that's my main platform, and that is project underscore past as well.
All right. Yeah. Well, and for those, if you want to look him up on YouTube, I think you can pretty easily. You just search Project Past, and he pops up. Or he's one of the first people that
And I
pops
see
up.
you wearing
so.
a
Yeah.
Project Past hat. So can people
Yeah.
order stuff from you? Like, is there a gift shop?
I have a store. I don't use it
Okay.
much. I pretty much use
Okay.
it for myself. If I want a shirt to wear in a video, I'll go on the
Yeah.
store and order
We do
it.
the same thing.
We do the same thing.
Yeah, it's linked to my YouTube. You can't get hats yet. I haven't
Okay.
found a cost-effective way to deliver your hats without charging you $50. I don't want to do that.
Sure.
Yeah.
Mhm.
So it's just, this is the most unique hat in the world. It's the only one like it.
There we go.
But yeah, I'm working on it. I'll post something if I can find something that's economic for everybody.
All
Cool.
right. Well, thank you so much, James, for joining us.
Thanks for
And
having me.
For those listening, to the Talk with History podcast, and please reach out to us at our website, talkwithhistory.com. But more importantly, if you know someone else that might enjoy this podcast, please share this with them, especially if you think that today's topic would interest a friend. Shoot them a text and tell them to look up the Talk with History podcast, because we rely on you, our community, to grow, and we appreciate you all every day. We'll talk to you next time.
Thank you.
All right. So I'm going to hit stop record.